My name is Tamsin. I am 35 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. I spend 50 hours a week staring at financial statements, hunting down the exact places where greedy corporate executives try to hide money that does not belong to them. I am very good at finding the lie buried deep inside a ledger. It requires a cold, clinical eye and an absolute refusal to let emotion cloud the numbers. Yet, for my entire adult life, I completely ignored the bleeding red ink in my own family. I was the classic invisible child. I was the problem solver, the gap filler, the human wallet who never asked for credit and never received any. When I slid that gold-lettered invoice out of the envelope, the sharp edge of the thick paper actually caught the pad of my thumb. It stung. A tiny, physical reminder of the humiliation they were handing me. I set my coffee down on the granite counter and dialed Cressida. My sister is 30 years old, an independent art dealer who has never sold a single painting, but always manages to wear designer clothes. She picked up on the second ring, the sound of a bridal fitting happening in the background. Someone was steaming tulle. Someone else was pouring champagne. Before I could even say hello, her voice came through the speaker, dripping with that rehearsed, glossy entitlement she always used when she wanted something expensive. It is an investment in family, Tamsin. Cashin expects a certain standard for our wedding. You know his parents are flying in from Europe. You do not have a husband or a family of your own to worry about, so you should be happy to help elevate our profile. My jaw tightened. The utter disrespect was so casual, so deeply ingrained in her vocabulary, that she did not even realize she was insulting my entire existence. I am not coming to your wedding, Cressida, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Have a beautiful day. I hung up before she could start screaming. I did not want to hear it. I just wanted the quiet of my kitchen back. But peace is never an option with my family. My phone buzzed against the marble counter, vibrating like an angry hornet. I looked down at the glowing screen. A text from Delphine, the woman who raised me. The mother who always made sure I knew my exact place in the hierarchy. Pay it, or you're dead to us. A threat. A final ultimatum meant to break my spirit and open my checkbook. But it did not make me reach for my credit card. It made me remember. Have you ever realized that the people who claim to love you the most are actually just holding you hostage? When I was 22 years old, I saved up $12,000 from working 3 miserable tutoring jobs in college. I wanted to buy a used car so I could stop taking a tower bus ride to my internship. Delphine found out. She sat me down at the kitchen table, tears brimming in her perfectly made-up eyes, and told me that Cressida had maxed out her credit cards on a trip to Paris and was facing a lawsuit. Family helps family, Tamsin, she had sobbed. I handed over my $12,000. I rode the bus for another year. When I was 29, I spent 6 months eating instant ramen and skipping lunches to scrape together a $20,000 deposit for a small townhouse. It was going to be my sanctuary. A week before I signed the papers, Delphine called. Cressida's fake art gallery was failing, and she needed a massive cash injection to keep the lease. Delphine told me that if I did not give them the deposit money, Cressida would be homeless, and it would be entirely my fault. I gave them the $20,000. I lost the house. I always justified it. I told myself I was paying down a moral debt. Delphine had given me life. She had put food on the table. She had clothed me. But the truth was, she never let me forget the cost of my existence. There was only one person in my entire childhood who looked at me like I was a human being and not a walking bank account. My Aunt Serafina. Serafina was Delphine's older sister, the wild one, the rebel who lived in a bohemian cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by wild gardens and stray cats. Delphine hated her. She called her a disgrace to the family name. But Serafina smelled like lavender and old books, and when she looked at me, her eyes were soft. When I turned 12, Serafina gave me a birthday present. It was a heavy, solid gold fountain pen. Near the cap, a beautiful, sweeping letter S was engraved into the metal. She placed it in my palm, folded my fingers over it, and whispered to me, "Always hold on to what is yours, little bird. Never sign your power away." Serafina died suddenly a few months later. I was devastated. At the funeral, while I was standing in the rain clutching that gold pen in my pocket, Delphine walked up to me, held out her hand, and took it. She said a child had no business carrying something so valuable. It would be kept safe for me. I never saw it again. I lived with these memories, accepting them as the normal tax of being a daughter. But as I stared at Delphine's threatening text message, a strange memory surfaced. A conversation from 6 months ago with my coworker, Ren. We had been drinking wine after closing a massive fraud case, and Ren had looked at a picture of my family on my phone. "You look absolutely nothing like them, Tamsin. You should take a DNA test. I bet you are adopted." We laughed about it. I actually took the test just to prove her wrong. But when the email arrived with the results, I felt a sudden, inexplicable terror. I never opened it. I left it buried in my inbox for half a year. Sitting in my cold kitchen, with the demand for $50,000 ringing in my ears, I finally found the courage to search my email. What was I so afraid of finding out? The page loaded. A colorful pie chart appeared, breaking down my ethnic background. I scrolled past it, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I reached the section labeled Close Family Matches. There was only one name on the list. Cressida. But right next to her name, where the algorithm clearly defines the biological relationship, it did not say sister. It said first cousin. I stopped breathing. I stared at the bold, black text on the screen. First cousin. Shared DNA, 880 centimorgans. In my line of work, numbers are a religion. Numbers do not care about your feelings, they do not care about your family history, and they absolutely do not lie. Full siblings share roughly 2,500 centimorgans of DNA. First cousins share anywhere from 500 to 1,300. 880 is not a glitch. It is not a rounding error. It is a biological certainty. I sat there in the silence, doing the math. If Cressida was my first cousin, that meant Delphine was not my mother. She was my aunt. And if Delphine was my aunt, then the woman who had always treated me with fierce, unconditional love, the woman whose death had shattered my teenage years. Aunt Serafina was not my aunt. She was my mother. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob that tore its way up my throat. Everything made sickening sense. The constant alienation. The way Delphine looked at me with disguised resentment. The way I was always expected to pay, to sacrifice, to bleed myself dry for Cressida. I was never a daughter to them. I was a trespasser they were forced to tolerate. But why? Why would Serafina hide me? Why would Delphine raise me and pretend I was hers? And then, the forensic accountant in me woke up. The grief vanished, replaced by an icy, razor-sharp clarity. Fraud always has a motive, and the motive is always money. Serafina lived a bohemian life, but she came from the same wealthy lineage as Delphine. When she died 19 years ago, she must have left something behind. And Delphine, acting as my mother, would have had total control over whatever that was. Delphine did not just steal my identity. She stole my mother. And she stole that gold fountain pen with the engraved S. She kept it all these years. And tomorrow morning, I was going to find out exactly what else she had stolen from me. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. I did not sleep a single minute that night. I just sat in the dark, watching the city's skyline slowly turn gray with the dawn, mapping out a full financial audit of the people who raised me. If they wanted $50,000 from me, they were about to get a masterclass in accounting. How deep does a family lie go before it destroys everyone involved? She answered immediately, her tone sharp and aggressive. Have you come to your senses, Tamsin? I expect that wire transfer to clear by noon. I made my voice soft, almost vulnerable. Mom, I said. I had the strangest dream last night. I dreamed about Aunt Serafina. Do you ever think I look like her? Do I have her eyes? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. It was a thick, suffocating silence, the kind that only happens when a liar realizes they are standing on a trapdoor. When Delphine finally spoke, her voice had lost all its arrogant command. It was high, tight, and bordering on panic. "Why on earth are you bringing her up? You look nothing like her. Do not ever ask me ridiculous questions like that again." She hung up. The line went dead. I smiled, but it was a cold, humorless expression. That was the exact reaction of a corporate embezzler realizing the auditors are in the building. She was terrified. I grabbed my car keys and drove 40 minutes out of the city to the Connecticut probate court. The building was old, built of heavy gray stone that smelled like floor wax and ancient paper. I walked up to the clerk's desk, presented my driver's license, and requested the estate files for Serafina, deceased 19 years ago. The clerk, an older man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, typed for a few minutes. He frowned at his screen, then stood up and walked into the back room. He returned 10 minutes later carrying a thick, heavy manila folder. He slid it across the counter toward me. I took the folder to a quiet wooden table in the corner of the room. My hands were steady now. I opened the cover. The very first document was a decree from the court establishing the Serafina Irrevocable Trust. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, looking for the key players. Grantor, Serafina. Sole beneficiary, Tamsin. Trustee, Delphine. There it was, written in black and white, stamped with the official seal of the state. 19 years ago, my mother died and left a private trust fund entirely to me. Because I was only 16 years old and a minor, the court appointed Delphine as the trustee, giving her complete legal authority to manage the money until I came of age. But I did come of age. I turned 18. I turned 21. I turned 30. And no one ever said a word. Delphine had kept me completely in the dark, feeding me lies about being a burden, conditioning me to hand over my own hard-earned paychecks to support her golden child, while she sat on a secret fortune that belonged to me. I turned the page to look at the financial disclosures. I needed to see the numbers. How much did she take from a grieving 16-year-old girl? When I walked through Bryony's door, she looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. She did not ask why I was there. She simply unlocked her desk drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope that smelled faintly of dried lavender. "Your mother left this with me the week before she passed," Bryony said softly. "She made me promise to keep it until you found out the truth on your own. Delphine threatened to ruin my practice if I ever contacted you directly." "I am so sorry, Tamsin." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in the elegant, sweeping handwriting I remembered from my childhood. "My dearest little bird," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and you have finally discovered the truth. I am your mother. I was young, unmarried, and considered a scandal by our toxic parents. To save our family's pristine reputation, they forced Delphine to claim you as her own. It is the greatest regret of my life that I was too weak to fight them. But I swear to you, I loved you every second of every day. I have left everything I own in a trust for you. Do not let them break you. Do not ever let them use the word family to turn you into a slave. Protect what is yours." Tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, blurring the ink. I was loved. I had always been loved. I wiped my face, put the letter safely in my bag, and turned my attention to the thick stack of financial statements Bryony handed me. It was the complete history of the trust fund. The numbers were a bloodbath. 19 years ago, the trust was funded with $4,500,000. Left alone in a decent index fund, it should have doubled by now. Instead, it had been systematically slaughtered. Year after year, Delphine had legally authorized withdrawals under the guise of housing and education for the beneficiary. But the money did not go to me. I saw a withdrawal of $80,000 for a luxury SUV the year I rode the bus. I saw transfers of $60,000 to pay for Cressida's private art school. I saw hundreds of thousands bled out for country club memberships, designer wardrobes, and lavish vacations. Delphine had built an entire upper-class lifestyle on the corpse of my inheritance. The current balance of the trust was just $800,000. But it was the very last line of the ledger that made my blood run completely cold. 1 month ago, a massive withdrawal of $150,000 had been initiated. The memo line read, "Vendor payments for Cressida's wedding." I stared at that line until my vision swam. Delphine was using the very last dregs of my dead mother's money to pay for Cressida's extravagant wedding. And the most sickening, brilliant part of their scam? Because Delphine knew the trust was running dry and her credit was ruined, she had emotionally manipulated me into putting all the wedding vendor contracts under my own name. She used my excellent credit score to secure the bookings, using my money to pay the deposits behind my back. They used my mother's money, and they used my signature. That was the biggest mistake they could have possibly made. When a thief hands the victim the keys to the vault, what happens next? At 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Cashin, Cressida's fiancé. Cashin was a 32-year-old junior executive who wore suits that were slightly too tight and always looked at me like I was the hired help. He thought he was marrying into immense generational wealth. He had no idea he was marrying into a sinking ship. I answered on speakerphone while booting up my laptop. "Listen to me very carefully, Tamsin," Cashin barked, trying to sound like an intimidating patriarch. "Cressida is crying her eyes out because of your selfish behavior. We arranged that VIP seating specifically to honor you. If you do not wire that $50,000 by the end of the day, I am going to make a public post on Facebook exposing you as a bitter, jealous sister who is trying to ruin our happiness. You will be dead to the entire extended family." In the background, I could hear Cressida doing her best dramatic, breathy sobbing. It was a pathetic, amateur performance. For the first time in my life, I did not apologize. I did not try to explain myself. I let a long, heavy silence fall over the line. I listened to him breathe. I listened to her fake crying. I felt a terrifying, powerful stillness wash over me. It is the silence of the hunter watching the prey walk directly into the snare. "Are you listening to me?" Cashin demanded, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of my silence. "I hear you perfectly, Cashin," I said softly. My voice was smooth, devoid of any anger. "I hope you and Cressida have exactly the wedding you both deserve." I tapped the screen to hang up. I did not block his number. I wanted him to have full access for what was about to happen next. On my laptop, I opened a folder neatly labeled Cressida's wedding. Inside were dozens of PDF documents. The catering agreement, the floral design contract, the 10-piece live band booking, the reservation for the luxury coastal estate. Every single one of those documents had my name typed at the top. Every single signature at the bottom was mine. Delphine had forced me to sign them months ago, crying that her credit was locked due to identity theft and promising she would transfer the funds. She did transfer the funds, straight out of my stolen inheritance. But legally, bindingly, in the eyes of the law and the vendors, I was the sole client. I was the master of the contracts. Cashin wanted to know what a bitter sister looked like. He wanted to threaten me with public exposure. I was going to give him a show that would echo in our family history for 100 years. I did not need to scream. I did not need to post on Facebook. I just needed 5 clicks of a mouse and a stable internet connection. If you are loving this story of a scapegoat finally waking up and taking her power back, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below telling me what city you are watching from. Every comment helps push this video to more people who need to hear it. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's burn this wedding to the ground. What do you think happens when you pull the financial rug out from under a narcissist? My first call was to the luxury catering company. A polite, cheerful woman answered. "Hi, this is Tamsin," I said, keeping my tone strictly professional. "I am the contract holder for the wedding this weekend. I need to cancel the entire order." The woman gasped. "Cancel? Ma'am, the wedding is in 4 days. The balance is $90,000. If you cancel now, you forfeit the deposit completely." "I am aware of the penalty," I replied smoothly. "Cancel it. Send the confirmation of cancellation to my email immediately." Next was the floral company. $45,000 worth of imported white orchids and roses. The owner, an older woman with a raspy voice, sounded genuinely concerned. Honey, are you sure? This is a massive cancellation. Is everything all right? I paused. I decided to give her a tiny piece of the truth. My family just sent me an invoice demanding $50,000 for a VIP seat to attend this wedding. The florist let out a loud, barking laugh of pure shock. Oh, honey, she said, her voice dropping an octave. I have been in the wedding business for 30 years. I have dealt with bridezillas, monsters, and drunk mother-in-laws. But I have never, ever heard of a family charging admission to their own sister. You cancel this right now. Keep your money and do not look back. I will void the contract on my end. Stay strong. Thank you, I said, and a genuine smile touched my face for the first time that day. I kept going. I canceled the 10-piece brass band, wiping out a $15,000 booking. Finally, I called the coastal estate venue. $60,000 for the weekend rental. Cancelled. Gone. Vaporized into the digital ether. Because I was the only authorized name on the accounts, no one else could reinstate them. The vendors could not accept orders from Delphine or Cressida. The contracts were dead. I finished the last call at 6 in the evening. I ordered Thai takeout, watched a documentary about deep-sea marine life, and waited. At exactly 1 in the morning, my phone lit up like a fireworks display. The automated cancellation emails had triggered a domino effect. The vendors had begun notifying the secondary contacts on the files. Delphine and Cressida were waking up to the financial apocalypse. My phone vibrated so hard it nearly walked off the kitchen counter. 30 missed calls from Delphine. 40 missed calls from Cressida. A barrage of text messages flooded the screen, the tone shifting wildly from enraged threats to desperate bargaining. What did you do? Cressida texted. The caterer just emailed me. Fix this right now. Delphine demanded. Then, 5 minutes later, Tamsin, please pick up. The venue says our reservation is void. Please, I am begging you. I did not answer a single one. I put my phone on silent, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. It was the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had enjoyed in 19 years. But the storm was only just beginning to gather over their heads. How does a family of liars react when their fake reality crumbles overnight? By noon, the reality of the situation had set in for Delphine. The wedding was 90% destroyed. There would be no flowers, no food, no band, and no venue. But there was one event I had not canceled because Delphine had paid for it in full, in cash, directly from her own pocket 6 months ago. The rehearsal dinner. It was scheduled for that evening at a hyper-exclusive, Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the marina. Delphine had invited 60 members of the local high society. The most important guest was Astrid, a 60-year-old chairwoman of a massive investment fund. Delphine had spent a decade kissing the ground Astrid walked on, desperate to be invited onto her charity board. Delphine cared more about Astrid's opinion than she cared about her own breathing. At 2 in the afternoon, Delphine sent me a final, chilling text message. The rehearsal dinner is still happening. You will be there at 7 o'clock sharp. You will stand up in front of everyone, apologize for your childish tantrum, and sign an agreement to pay for the damages you have caused. If you do not show up, Cashin will release a statement to the entire community about your mental instability. Do not test me, Tamsin. I read the text and let out a soft laugh. She was doubling down. She thought she could use the pressure of a room full of wealthy, judgmental elites to bully me into submission. She wanted to trap me in public, forcing me to play the role of the broken, repentant daughter to save her image. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. I bypassed the modest, muted dresses Delphine always forced me to wear to fade into the background. Instead, I pulled out a sharp, tailored black blazer and a sleek dress. It was the outfit I wore to court when testifying against white-collar criminals. It was armor. I pinned my hair back. And then, from the bottom of my jewelry box, I pulled out a tiny, velvet pouch. Inside was a silver hairpin adorned with a single, brilliant blue sapphire. It was the only other item my mother, Serafina, had managed to sneak to me before she died. I slid the sapphire clip into my hair. Finally, I picked up a thick, black leather folder. Inside were the DNA results, 50 pages of bleeding bank statements from the Serafina Trust, and the letter from my real mother. Delphine wanted a public performance. She wanted to use peer pressure to force my hand. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. I was going to give her the funeral of her reputation, catered with expensive champagne and witnessed by the very people she worshipped. If you were walking into a room full of people waiting to humiliate you, what evidence would you bring? Let's see if your plan matches mine. When I walked through the double oak doors, the conversation immediately died. The silence was thick and heavy, like humidity before a thunderstorm. 60 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me with varying degrees of pity, disgust, and morbid curiosity. They had all been prepped. They all thought I was the crazy, jealous sister coming to beg for forgiveness. Delphine stood up. She wore a stunning emerald green gown, but her face was tight with suppressed panic. She immediately switched into her fake, loving mother persona. "Tamsin, darling," she cooed, her voice echoing perfectly in the quiet room. "Come sit down. We are family. We can fix this together." I walked slowly toward the head table. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I did not sit. I stood directly opposite Delphine, with the heavy black folder resting under my arm. Delphine picked up a silver spoon and tapped her champagne glass. The room fell into absolute, breathless silence. "I think we all know why we are here tonight," Delphine began, pressing a hand to her chest in a theatrical display of maternal sorrow. "Families fight. Sometimes, the pressure of a wedding causes people to act completely out of character. My daughter, Tamsin, has made some terrible mistakes this week. But we believe in grace. We believe in forgiveness." She reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She laid it on the white linen right in front of me. It was a typed confession, admitting fault for canceling the wedding and promising to pay the $50,000 VIP fee as restitution. Then, she reached into her bag one more time. She pulled out a heavy, solid gold fountain pen. Near the cap, a beautiful, sweeping letter S caught the light of the chandelier. "Sign it, Tamsin," Delphine whispered, her eyes completely dead, offering the pen like a poisoned apple. Cashin leaned forward, his face red. "Sign the paper, Tamsin," he hissed. "Stop embarrassing us." I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the typed confession. The air in the room was so tense it felt like glass ready to shatter. I reached out. I picked up the gold pen. I felt its familiar weight in my palm, a weight I had not felt since I was 12 years old standing in the rain at a funeral. "You kept my mother's pen in incredibly good condition, Delphine," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. Delphine flinched as if I had struck her. Her perfectly painted lips parted, but no sound came out. I did not sign the paper. Instead, I opened my black leather folder. With deliberate, sweeping motions, I tossed the thick stack of bank statements across the table. They fanned out over the white linen, red ink bleeding across the pages. I tossed the DNA test results right on top of Cashin's dinner plate. "I cannot sign your confession, Delphine," I said, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "Because you are not my mother. And that $50,000 you want? You are going to need it to pay your defense attorney. What happens when the elite realize the person they are drinking with is a common thief?" I looked up and addressed the entire room, my voice ringing clear and steady. "The woman you know as Delphine is my aunt. 19 years ago, my biological mother, Serafina, passed away and left a trust fund of $4,500,000 solely in my name. Delphine was appointed as the legal trustee to protect me." I pointed to the papers scattered across the table. "Instead of protecting me, she spent the last 19 years stealing every single penny. The house she lives in? Bought with my money. Cressida's art degree? Paid for by my mother's ghost. This very dinner party, the champagne in your glasses? Funded by the last remaining cash of an orphan child's inheritance." Cressida let out a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "Shut up. She is lying. Cashin, tell her to shut up." But Cashin was not looking at me. He had picked up the DNA test results. His eyes started from the paper to the bank statements showing the catastrophic drain of funds. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He was a greedy man, and he knew how to read a ledger. He suddenly realized he was not marrying an heiress. He was marrying a parasite with a mountain of legal liability. At the end of the table, Astrid, the chairwoman of the investment fund, slowly reached out and picked up the top page of the bank statements. She adjusted her reading glasses. She read the numbers. Then, she slowly lowered the paper and looked at Delphine. Astrid's face was a mask of aristocratic disgust. You stole millions of dollars from an orphan child so you could buy designer dresses and pretend you belonged in our circle? She asked, her voice dripping with ice. You are utterly repulsive, Delphine. My foundation does not associate with common criminals. Astrid stood up, dropped her napkin onto the floor, and walked out of the room without looking back. The spell was broken. Chairs scraped loudly against the hardwood. Whispers erupted into loud, shocked murmurs. One by one, the wealthy guests stood up, turned their backs on the head table, and followed Astrid out the door. The mass exodus of Delphine's precious social standing happened in less than 2 minutes. Cashin threw the DNA test onto the table. He looked at Cressida with pure venom. You lied to me, he snarled. You are completely broke. He ripped the boutonniere off his lapel, threw it at her feet, and stormed out of the restaurant. Cressida collapsed into her chair, sobbing violently, her makeup running down her face in ugly black streaks. Delphine was completely frozen, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were bone white. Her mouth opened and closed, but she had no lies left to tell. I slowly walked past the head table. I stopped right next to Delphine's chair, leaned down, and whispered in her ear. The VIP invoice has been paid in full. Keep the change. I turned around and walked out into the cool night air, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. There was no wedding that weekend. The coastal estate remained empty, the brass band stayed home, and Cressida locked herself in her bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone. Cashin did not just call off the engagement. He sent a moving truck to their shared apartment while she was out and took every piece of furniture he had ever purchased. On Monday morning, I met with Bryony at the courthouse. We did not hesitate. We filed a massive civil lawsuit against Delphine for fiduciary fraud, breach of trust, and grand larceny. Because the evidence was so overwhelming and documented in black and white by the bank itself, the judge granted an emergency injunction. By Wednesday afternoon, the court ordered a total freeze on every single asset Delphine owned. Her bank accounts were locked. Her credit cards were declined at the grocery store. The luxury SUV she drove was flagged for repossession. The bank, realizing the mortgage had been paid with stolen funds, initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings on her beautiful suburban home. The empire of lies was burning to the ground, and I was holding the matches. The flying monkeys, the aunts and uncles who had left me vicious voicemails just a few days prior, suddenly changed their tune. My phone started ringing with apologies. They claimed they had no idea. They claimed Delphine had manipulated them. They begged me to show mercy to the family. I blocked every single one of their numbers. Then came the phone call I knew was inevitable. It was a Friday evening. My phone buzzed, displaying an unknown number. I answered it, putting it on speaker. Tamsin, please. Delphine's voice came through the speaker. It was unrecognizable. The haughty, commanding tone was completely gone, replaced by the ragged, desperate wheeze of a woman who had lost absolutely everything. Please, Tamsin. The bank is taking the house. I cannot buy groceries. Cressida has not stopped crying in a week. You proved your point. Please drop the lawsuit. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You owe me a little mercy. I stood in my kitchen, looking out the window at the city lights. I did not feel a shred of pity. I felt exactly nothing. You stole my mother, Delphine, I said, my voice completely flat and void of any emotion. You stole my identity, you stole my inheritance, and you charged me $50,000 for the privilege of watching you celebrate it. You put a roof over my head using my own money. I have already paid my rent for the last 19 years. I do not owe you a single cent. But we are family, she shrieked, her voice cracking in desperation. No, Delphine, I replied calmly. We are plaintiff and defendant. Do not ever call this number again. I pressed the red button and hung up. I watched her contact name fade into the digital history of my phone, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would never speak to her again. They had tried to bury me, but they forgot I was the one who knew how to dig up the bodies. When the dust finally settles, what do you do with the power you take back? As for me, the court recovered the remaining $800,000 from the trust fund and transferred it directly into my control. I did not buy a sports car. I did not throw a lavish party to celebrate my victory. Instead, I took that money and walked into Bryony's law office. We drafted a new set of legal documents. I established a nonprofit foundation called Seraphina's Shield. Its sole purpose is to provide free legal and forensic accounting services to young women who are victims of financial abuse by their own toxic families. I wanted to make sure that no other girl would ever have to spend 19 years thinking she was a burden when she was actually the bank. On the day the foundation was officially incorporated, I sat at the heavy oak desk in my new office. The sunlight streamed through the window, warm and bright. Bryony placed the final incorporation documents in front of me. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out the heavy, solid gold fountain pen. The one with the sweeping letter S engraved near the cap. I had taken it from the table at the rehearsal dinner, reclaiming the last piece of my mother. I uncapped the pen. The ink flowed smooth and dark across the thick paper. For the first time in my entire life, I signed a document not to bail out Cressida, not to pay off Delphine's debts, and not to buy the love of people who hated me. I signed my own name to build my own legacy. I signed my name to take my power back. Some of my distant relatives still whisper about me. They call me cold-blooded. They say I was too ruthless, that pushing my aunt and cousin into poverty was a cruel and unnecessary revenge. They believe that blood should always forgive blood, no matter the crime. So, I am leaving the final judgment to you. Tell me, do you think I should have shown them mercy, or did they get exactly the karma they ordered? Leave your verdict in the comments. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found peace in this ending, make sure to hit that subscribe button for Kiwi Revenge. And remember, never set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. The best revenge is living a brilliant life without them. See you in the next story.